The studio lights flare. A band plays the familiar theme. A tall man in a crisp suit walks out, waving to a roaring crowd. He grins, leans toward the mic, and fires off a joke that lands with surgical precision. Equal parts charm and rebellion. For 30 years, that man, David Letterman, was the heartbeat of late-night America. But behind the laughter was a quieter story. A perfectionist haunted by self-doubt. A comedian who turned pain into punchlines. A man who mastered irony so well, he sometimes hid behind it. Every night he invited the world to laugh, not just at others, but at themselves. He mocked fame, defied convention, and asked the question few dared to: what's really funny about being human? Yet beneath the spotlight's warmth, there were shadows, heartbreak, scandal, and the price of always being the cleverest man in the room. Before the applause and the fame, before the desk and the cue cards, there was just a shy kid from Indiana staring at a glowing TV screen and dreaming of one day making the world laugh back. David Michael Letterman was born on April 12, 1947, in Indianapolis, Indiana, the middle of America, where dreams were modest and humor was a way to survive boredom. His father, Harry Joseph Letterman, ran a small florist shop, a kind, warm man with a booming laugh who adored making people smile. His mother, Dorothy Mengering, was the steady hand of the household, patient, supportive, and quietly proud of her curious, shy boy. David wasn't the loud kid in class. He was the one observing everyone else, storing their quirks, their slips, their contradictions, the very material that would later fuel his comedy. He loved cars, radio shows, and the controlled chaos of weather broadcasts. But at 21, his world changed forever. Harry suffered a sudden heart attack and died. A trauma that would shape Letterman's humor for life. That tragedy carved something deep inside him. A fear of loss, a fascination with control, and a belief that laughter was the only armor against heartbreak. His father's warmth became the ghost behind every joke. His mother's quiet strength became the moral compass he'd need later. At Ball State University, David discovered the magic of communication and the thrill of being funny on air. He hosted a college radio show, often improvising absurd jokes that made his professors furious and his classmates roar with laughter. Somewhere between grief and curiosity, that awkward boy from Indianapolis found his calling: to make people laugh, not to escape life, but to survive it. The stage would come later, but the voice, the wit, the restlessness, it all began here, in a small house in Indiana, where a boy learned that humor could fill even the quietest room. After graduating from Ball State University, David Letterman didn't step straight into stardom. He walked into a newsroom. At an Indianapolis TV station, he was hired as a weatherman, and even then his sarcasm couldn't be contained. He'd give absurd forecasts, joke about imaginary weather fronts, and once congratulated a tropical storm for being the only exciting thing in Indiana. Viewers were puzzled. Management was furious. David was, unmistakably, himself. But ambition tugged at him. In 1975, with a beat-up car and a head full of odd jokes, he drove to Los Angeles, chasing a dream that didn't quite have a map. He started performing at small comedy clubs, often to half-empty rooms where laughter came late. Or not at all. He was awkward, dry, and brutally honest, a combination most audiences didn't know what to make of. But fellow comedians saw something different: originality. One night, his sharp wit caught the attention of Johnny Carson's talent scouts. Soon after, Letterman was invited to perform on The Tonight Show. The nervous kid from Indiana stood under blinding studio lights and delivered. Carson laughed. The audience cheered. It was the validation every comedian dreams of, and the moment that changed his life. That appearance opened every door. He began guest hosting for Carson, earning the industry's respect for his unpredictable, self-aware humor. NBC noticed. They wanted something new, something different. And Letterman, with his offbeat timing and fearless honesty, was exactly that. By 1982, he had his own show, Late Night with David Letterman. The man who once mocked the weather was now the storm, ready to rewrite what late-night comedy could be. He had arrived. But the spotlight, as he would soon learn, shines brightest before it burns. When Late Night with David Letterman premiered on NBC in 1982, no one had ever seen anything like it. The set looked familiar: desk, chair, band. But the energy was chaos wrapped in brilliance. Letterman didn't play by talk show rules. He mocked them. He tossed cue cards, interrupted guests, and made absurd stunts legendary, dropping watermelons off rooftops, hosting stupid pet tricks, or turning small talk into existential comedy. For America, it was electrifying. For the networks, terrifying. And for David, it was liberating. His humor was sharper, colder, and more self-aware than his peers. Where others smiled, he smirked. Where others flattered, he questioned. Night after night, he turned late television into an unpredictable theater of irony. Critics called him the anti-host. Fans called him a genius. Behind the camera, though, he was obsessive, rewriting jokes until dawn, controlling every detail, and pushing his writers and himself to exhaustion. Then came the storm of the 1990s. The Tonight Show war. When Johnny Carson retired, everyone assumed David, Carson's chosen successor, would take over. Instead, NBC handed the crown to Jay Leno. It was a public betrayal. For Letterman, it was personal. Rather than surrender, he made a bold move, leaving NBC for CBS and launching The Late Show with David Letterman in 1993. The competition between him and Leno became a national obsession. The Late Night Wars. At CBS, Letterman evolved. The edge remained, but his humor gained depth. He interviewed presidents and rock stars, delivered heartfelt monologues after national tragedies, and stood as the face of a generation's nightly ritual. By the early 2000s, he wasn't just hosting television, he defined it. He inspired an entire lineage of talk show hosts who still echo his rhythm, wit, and rebellion. From an awkward weatherman to America's most unpredictable late-night mind, David Letterman had done it. He'd conquered television by refusing to play its game. But while his audience laughed every night, his own heart was still searching for peace behind the curtain. For decades, David Letterman seemed untouchable, the sharpest wit in late night, the man who could turn any crisis into comedy. But in 2009, the laughter stopped. One autumn evening, Letterman opened his show with an unusually somber expression. He confessed, live before millions, that he had been blackmailed for having affairs with women on his staff. The revelation stunned America. The king of irony was suddenly the subject of his own scandal. The confession was both brave and humiliating. He joked through the tension, but the pain was visible, his voice cracking, his eyes lowered. For a man who spent his life in control, the truth felt like exposure. Behind the scenes, the fallout was brutal. His marriage to longtime partner Regina Lasco trembled under the weight of betrayal. Tabloids feasted. Fans divided, some applauding his honesty, others condemning his hypocrisy. It wasn't his first confrontation with mortality. 9 years earlier, in 2000, Letterman had undergone emergency quintuple bypass surgery after a near-fatal heart attack. He returned to television with visible gratitude, but the shadow of fragility lingered. Now the emotional scars ran even deeper. Through it all, his humor darkened, more introspective, less performative. He began to talk about fear, mistakes, and forgiveness, not as a performer, but as a man. It was no longer about being funny. It was about being human. The scandal stripped away his armor. The legend who once mocked vulnerability had to live it. And as he stumbled through public shame, he discovered something his career had never taught him: how to face life without the safety of a joke. The laughter would return, but not the same way. For David Letterman, redemption would come quietly through reflection, and through learning to laugh with himself, not at himself. When the laughter finally softened, David Letterman did something rare for a man who lived in front of cameras. He disappeared. In the aftermath of scandal and exhaustion, he stepped back, choosing silence over spotlight. For the first time in decades, there was no desk, no cue cards, no audience waiting for a punchline. Just David, a husband, a father, a man trying to rebuild. In private, he devoted himself to his wife, Regina Lasco, and their son, Harry. He spoke later about the guilt that haunted him, about how fame had made him selfish, detached, and afraid of intimacy. "I wasn't the person I wanted to be," he admitted in an interview years later. That confession wasn't for the viewers. It was for himself. Slowly, he found peace in simplicity. He grew a long, unkempt beard, a symbol, perhaps, of the man who no longer needed to play the role of late-night Dave. He began traveling, reading and reflecting, rediscovering his curiosity about people, not as guests but as souls. In 2015, after more than 6,000 episodes, he retired from The Late Show. His final night was not a spectacle but a farewell, emotional, sincere, and filled with gratitude. As the crowd stood in ovation, Letterman smiled not as an entertainer, but as a survivor. Then, years later, came a quieter return. Netflix's My Next Guest needs no introduction. Gone were the suits and scripted laughs. In their place, open conversations with Barack Obama, Malala Yousafzai, Kim Kardashian, and Billie Eilish. No monologues, no irony, just truth. It was David Letterman, reborn. Not the man who mocked the world, but the man who finally learned to listen to it. His redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about growing beyond it. By the time David Letterman said his final goodnight in 2015, an entire generation of comedians, writers, and dreamers had already grown up in his shadow. He didn't just host television, he reprogrammed it. Every awkward pause, every sarcastic remark, every absurd skit that blurred the line between sincerity and satire all became the DNA of modern comedy. Shows like Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, Last Week Tonight, and Jimmy Kimmel Live all trace their rhythm, tone, and courage back to Letterman. He gave permission for talk shows to be weird, human, and self-aware. He taught audiences that intelligence and irony could coexist, that laughter could challenge power just as easily as it could entertain. In the age of social media and fast headlines, his slow, dry, fearless humor feels almost sacred, a reminder of when comedy still had soul. Colbert once said, "Everything I've ever done on television is a love letter to Dave." Conan called him the most important influence of my life. But perhaps Letterman's greatest legacy wasn't in the jokes, it was in the honesty behind them. He showed that a comedian could be vulnerable, that imperfection could be powerful. David Letterman didn't build a career. He built a language of humor, one that generations still speak every night on television screens around the world. And though he left the stage years ago, his timing, his tone, and his courage to be unapologetically real still echo long after the applause faded. The David Letterman the world sees today is almost unrecognizable from the man who once ruled late-night television. The sharp suit is gone, replaced by loose shirts and an unkempt beard that has become his quiet trademark. The mischievous grin remains, but now it hides wisdom instead of irony. After retiring, he traded cue cards for curiosity. He traveled the world, interviewing global figures not for laughs, but for insight. He talked about aging, forgiveness, and what it means to be content after a lifetime of chasing applause. In interviews, he often reflects on fatherhood, how becoming a parent at 56 changed everything. His son Harry became his anchor, grounding him in a world that once revolved around ratings and relevance. "Now," he said softly, "I just want to be a good dad. That's all I care about." He also became an advocate for kindness, supporting education, environmental work, and heart health awareness, not through grand gestures or publicity, but through quiet generosity. Letterman no longer defines success by laughter or fame. He defines it by peace, by the simple act of showing up honestly. The man who once built walls of sarcasm now speaks openly about fear, mistakes, and gratitude. He laughs more softly now, not to entertain, but to understand. In the twilight of fame, David Letterman has found something he spent a lifetime searching for: a sense of grace in imperfection, and the rare freedom of a man finally at ease with who he is. The stage is empty now. No desk, no cue cards, no band. Just the faint echo of laughter that once filled the Ed Sullivan Theater, a sound that defined an era. David Letterman walks off that stage for the final time, not as a host, but as a man who has lived every version of himself in front of an audience. The dreamer, the cynic, the rebel, the fool, and finally, the human being who learned to forgive himself. His story is not about perfection. It's about endurance, the courage to evolve, to stumble, and to rise again with humor still intact. In a world obsessed with image, he taught us that vulnerability is strength, that it's okay to laugh through pain, and even better, to find meaning in it. He made America laugh. He made America think. And in doing so, he left behind something no scandal or rating war could erase: a legacy of authenticity. Because for David Letterman, comedy was never just entertainment. It was survival. And sometimes, the greatest joke of all is realizing the punchline was never about laughter, but about life itself.